calling all Clojure beginners. The Clouncil is a fun and friendly live call-in show for people starting off on their journey with Clojure to ask experienced Clojurians questions and work out problems together. Why do we do this? Well, we want to help you get unstuck. Are you baffled, befuddled, flustered, flummoxed? Having trouble telling your left parentheses from your right? Your conj from your cons? Well, every other Wednesday, we are here to help you out. Who's here to help you out? The Clouncil core team consists of 5 developers. Myself, Jordan Miller, aka Lambda, as a Chief Lambda Officer. Friend Paula Giron, the Graph Whisperer. Another friend, Mike Fikes, who's known to be a self-hosted compiler. Arne Brasseur, head of transducing, and of course, our captain of this ship and inspiration for this project, Daniel Higginbotham. If you follow the QR code on the screen, or you just navigate to theclouncil.com, you too can give us a question to answer and work through. We will also have a myriad of guests and surprise people joining us. Can't wait to see you there.
Welcome to the Clouncil, a call-in show for noobs, newbies, and novices on the path to being Clojure pros. We want to hear from you. Pass us your problems, throw us your code, tell us what has you stumped and befuddled, and we'll make sure to sort it out. Can't tell your left parenthesis from your right, your conj from your cons. Is a protocol something your landlord asked you to sign? Have no fear. We'll take you from applied to zipper, reducing the ecosystem to exactly the bits you need to know. Today, I am your host, Arne Brasseur, and I'm joined today by Clojure Paula, whose magnum opus is an owl ontology of Lisp macro families and their indentation styles. We have Clojure Daniel, who has a patent pending for donuts cut in half, known as doparans, TM. Clojure Jordan, who in her younger years was rumored to write her love letters as expressions. This interestingly turned out to be a great way to filter out unworthy candidates. And Clojure Mike, who was born with an innate ability to detect if things contain an embedding ECMAScript runtime. The fact that this includes his garage port does keep him up at night. Hold on to your apples, because the Clouncil is in session. All right, so it's been a couple weeks. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. We had to skip last time because of Clojure D, where almost all of the Clouncilors, except sadly for Mike, managed to get together. So that was really cool. But we're back here now, and we got a couple more questions. So I want to remind everyone that you can find a link on our website. Find a form there, send in your questions. There's no question too silly. Feel free if something comes up during your work, you're like, oh, I kind of get it, but I'm not sure I really do. Just go over to theclouncil.com, send in your questions, and then make sure to dial in the next session. And, if possible, we'll pick up your question and you can sort of elaborate a little bit on the call. We've picked a couple questions from stuff that has been sent in the past, but we also have a topic that we saw some folks on Clojurians being a little confused about. And so we thought it would be interesting to dig into that today. And that is the topic of resources and sort of how it relates to the paths that you configure in, for instance, your project CLJ or your deps Eden. And so to kind of set the stage, to kind of like, make sure people know what we're talking about. So in the Clojure Java IO namespace, so this is a namespace that comes with Clojure, which has, as the name implies, sort of like wrappers for input, output, like file system stuff that's provided by Java. And so there's an IO/file function. And if you use that like with, like a relative file name, it's just going to look it up in somewhere in the directory of your project. But there's also an IO/resource function, which is kind of similar or at least it seems to be on the surface, because it also is usually used to find files that are somewhere in your project. but these two are not the same. And especially once you get to deploying stuff, this can lead to some hiccups, some sharp edges. And so, yeah, there's clearly some questions that we're kind of going to see how different counselors, what their take is on these things. Another way that might like spur some interesting conversation is like if you're used to using lining, and they actually have a source paths in Project CLJ and a resource paths, which are like separate configurations. But then in Depths Eden, there's no such distinction. So what's up with that? So maybe before we go to the other counselors, let's see like any of the folks attending, like does this mean anything to you? Have you run into issues with resources? Do you think you understand it fairly well, or are you not sure? Like what's your feeling about these things? Let's have some input from the crowd, please. And don't be shy. Like you said, there's no, nothing too silly for the Clouncil. So feel free to just unmute yourself or raise your hand. Aaron, I saw you put some thumbs ups already. Is this a topic that means anything to you?
It was just interesting to me. Because I'm probably having some Dunning-Kruger here. Like I think I understand it, but it'd be interesting to see if you guys know anything that I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I think I feel the same way.
Yeah, there's certainly some nuances, and hopefully we can refine everyone's understanding. Let's maybe have a show of hand. Either use the emojis, or if you have your camera on, just raise your hand. Have you used the IO resource function before? Do you actually know what we're talking about? Okay, so I see some hands and I see some nay shaking.
What you're talking about, yeah. What is this
see
thing
some
you're talking
thumbs
about?
up. Yeah, so maybe a bit of a split there. Okay, who of the counselors wants to kind of like start from the bottom, and maybe for the folks that aren't really up to speed yet with what we're talking about, sort of give them a little bit of context.
Start with a question more so on the maybe leading one of the more tenured counselors to. I'm also one of those people that I think I've been using it correctly. Resources, that's where I put the stuff I want to use, but I don't think that's necessarily. It feels like there's some rules to this, and maybe we should start with the rules, perhaps.
Well, I can explain how I use it, but I don't know that it's necessarily exactly what's right. Most development environments that I've worked in have had the opportunity to include data with your source files. Data that isn't being inlined in your sources. And back in the days when I was writing Windows DLLs, you could put resources in there. But when
images and stuff like that.
Yeah. And so when I'm doing it on the JVM especially, there are occasions where there's just blocks of data that I want to bring with me by default. Now, you could always ship like an image file with everything, but that gives the user the opportunity to delete it. And if your application absolutely must have it, then you really want it hidden inside the jar or the binary that you're distributing. And this can apply for everything like menus that you're going to use, images, anything which is based on data, but not necessarily code. And we can put everything into data structures in Clojure if we want and have very large source files, but that's really, I don't think that's ideal at all. Having data that we can parse and use within the code, but essentially be a part of the application seems to be a really good use case for this. And mentioning that it's on the JVM, I mean, when we call that IO resource function, that's actually just doing a call back to the JVM and saying, can you give me the resource? And that asks the JVM's class loader to find it. And naturally that will look through your class path, it'll look in your resources directory and look inside the jars, things like this. And so it really just provides a location, a position for finding stuff. And yeah, I like to, for data that must be with the application that shouldn't be edited. That's where I like to put, that's what I like to use resources for, and yeah, and where I'll put it.
Mhm.
That's a good summary. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so a few things in there, right? So like jars. I feel like this is going to be a key part of conversation here, right? Because like, why can't we just use IO file for everything? You know, we're like, if we want to access a file, you know, why do we need this resource? And like you've mentioned jars, which are for a lot of people, they're mainly a thing that you consume, right? Like our libraries come in jars, but when you're shipping your own code, like say you're deploying it on a server, you might also bundle it in a jar. And so if you want to bundle files, resources within that jar and access them, you know, that's the kind of thing where what IO resource is for. And so it, yeah, like the class loader stuff that Paula talks about, it's sort of a different strategy for finding files.
Incidentally, for anybody who's not really familiar with jars, of course, a lot of Java itself, a lot of the systems around the JVM use jars. Jars are really just a particular structure that was defined for zip files. You can use the unzip program on a jar file and it'll just extract everything. It's just a way of taking a whole lot of files and putting them into one file.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, jars are really just files. And so when you ask for a resource, it yeah, it's gonna like try to find it in different places, which could be directories or jars. Mike, can you maybe like shed a bit of light on this? Like what, you know, like how does it decide which places to look?
Oh yeah, this is where I think I understand it. And I've always, my understanding right now is roughly like, it just looks like in the class path, kind of like Paula said. Now it may look in other places as well, but that's my general understanding is like, yeah, you have a file somewhere on the class path, just load it that way, you know? And to me,
what's the class path?
Okay, yeah, so it's a Java specific thing, right? That's the way I think of it. It's like when it's a runtime thing that tells you where you find things. If you're loading class files in Java, right, which are compiled Java files, it's just a place. It's the path of where to load to look to load code. The class loader. Okay, so maybe we're talking in circles here. Yeah.
Yeah. If I want to,
yeah.
okay, let's try to make this concrete. If I want to see what we've actually touched upon this before, right? Like. How do I see what the class path is? And if I want to add something to this class path, like how would I go about that? Like say, for instance, in Tapseed or in a project CLJ.
I kind of even want to, I want to back up even just like a little bit more, just and like, I know like my experience, like going into Clojure was like, felt like so much confusion about doing any of this IO stuff. When you're learning Clojure and like it's like, oh, interact with the REPL, learn how to use a function. This is map, this is reduce, and whatnot. Like so, like that was all more easily graspable, I think, because it's like this is all just within like the running REPL, right? But so like what we're talking about is just like, okay, you're building a program, and like within your program, now we want to learn how to not just like run computations or whatever, like within the program itself, but we want to start learning how to interact with the outside world, right? And so when we talk about like this Clojure Java IO namespace, like this is one of the main namespaces that we can reach for to start finding tools for interacting with the outside world. And so yeah, and so like so IO stands for input output. And just like the idea here is like you might have other files like somewhere, like it's more than this. Anyway, I'll start here. You might have files like elsewhere on your system, right? So like Paula was kind of talking about this. You might have like image files, or maybe you'll have like a CSV file or something like that, right? And you need like some way to actually read the contents of that file so that it's then in your program, and then you can start manipulating the contents of that file like in your program. So like that's the input side of it. And the output side of it is then like, how do you then actually write stuff back like outside of your program? And typically when you do this, you're going to be reading from your computer, what's called the file system. So like every computer has a kind of hierarchical layout of like these directories that, where you store files. And if you're super new to programming, like maybe you haven't even seen that before, but basically it's like you can think of each file as having an address on your computer. And so like what you need to be able to do is like, given some address for a file on your computer, like load that into your program and then manipulate it. And then maybe given some other address or even the same address, you want to then like be able to write contents to a file on the file system. So anyway, so I'll just pause there and see. Like,
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Can you only read from a resource but not write to it? Can you slurp a resource but not spit to it?
you should. It depends. It depends on like the
actual resource. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So each of these resources.
What is a resource? Like does IO resource return an object of type resource?
Well,
it's like a zip path or something weird sometimes, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
This opaque, nasty looking thing. Yeah.
Well, could we get a
defined.
It is clearly defined. Can someone show like
Yes.
maybe in a REPL, like like the type of IO file and the type of something that comes back from IO resource?
Sure. But also, but before we move on, I want to just like check in if like folks in the audience, are we kind of like all on the same page about like what we're talking about here, like what we're trying to accomplish when it comes to like talking about resources and IO and Clojure. And so if you're not sure, maybe like raise your hand and we can try to explain it a little bit better. Okay. Jordan and Wendy, yeah, absolutely. I guess like if y'all like, would y'all like to ask your questions, or I don't want to put you on the spot.
I'm going to put Wendy on the spot because I'm about to be put on the spot having to screen share. Wendy, take it away, Wendy.
Sorry,
What
I
was
was
the
trying
question?
to do something. I just don't know what IO is, and I can't Google and listen. So yeah, I just don't even know what IO is.
Okay.
IO I know is input output, and I
Yeah, good
learned
question.
that really late, like the company I work at, it's called vouch.io, and .io is a trendy thing, and I was
Oh, well, that stands for. I didn't know that.
well, I was Fikes works there too. So I mean, I was like kind of recently years old when I made the connection of vouch.io, that being the name, and then being trendy because it also means IO. It's like a tech thing. Yeah, no, I googled IO. What does that mean? And it means input output.
It feels like a term from the 70s. IO.
Yeah,
So you're saying Vouch is not based in the British Indian Ocean Territory?
No,
We're abusing that
cool.
domain name, I guess.
Yeah, we're just cool. There's a couple of them that are like that, but yeah, I had to Google. So IO in its simplest sense is like input output. So my understanding of it, I raised my question. I guess I'll elaborate this into a question. So a program, essentially what it's doing is taking something, changing it up, doing something to it, and then deploying it, serving it out, like giving it to something else. So IO to me is like the things that, input, the things that you're taking to do something with, because, very rarely do you write a program that's like lives completely in isolation, that just doesn't. And so you need to have and because we believe abstraction is key, got to have like your nice little organized abstraction layer. And IO is something that's, I think, across all languages, a pretty everybody knows that IO means the place where you put things that you're getting and putting back out. Is that, I'm going to ask the other folks that do it.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to put it. Like what Daniel was saying, right? Like when you're just working on data, you're like you're mapping and filtering and associating and dissociating. You're like that's all like just data inside your program. But for your program to do something useful, you probably want to get like either some information from outside your program into your program, or something from inside your program to the outside world. And this is super broad, right? Like we're talking about files and stuff like that now, but it could be like network, like that's also IO, or like reading stuff from the keyboard or from a mouse, like that's also IO.
Yeah, I
Like
love
basically,
Christiana just mentioned that in the side channel. The hardware example is a keyboard is an input and a speaker is an output. That great. Thank you, Christiana. Sorry to interrupt you, Arne.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, so all of that is IO. Now, in Java has its own abstractions around, like to sort of like deal with this stuff in a unified way. And so the Clojure Java IO namespace sort of provides Clojure functions that provide a convenient Clojure-y way to deal with these Java abstractions.
IO is also kind of good and bad. You need it to have your program do something, but like it's at odds with the purely functional kind of like pure world, right?
Yeah.
You touch IO and you're like in trouble.
Yeah, there's kind of side effecty in and of it. It is
side effecty. Yeah. So you want to push it to the side or manage it.
We don't like side effects. That's first rule. First rule of being a functional programming snob is side effects. Nay, nay.
So okay, let's try to actually get to some answers here, right?
Yeah, you asked me to screen share something. I was preparing for the next question. I can screen share, but we're all going to struggle through it together.
we can also just talk through it. That's fine. So if you would evaluate IO file, you would get a Java IO file object, which is really just a wrapper around a path on your hard drive, on your file system. And like having that, you can like read from that file, or open that file for reading, or open that file for writing. If you call IO resource, what you'll find is that the thing you get back is a JavaNet URL. And if that happens to be a resource that's on your file system, then it's going to be a URL with the protocol file. It's going to be like file : something something. If it's a resource that's inside a jar, it's going to be like, it's going to have a special protocol jar, which kind of only exists within the Java, JVM world. But like these, some other Java IO, like functions know that if you give it a URL that starts with jar, that it means that it needs to look something up inside a jar. So then it's going to be like jar, and then the path to the jar, ! And then the path to the file within the jar. And so it kind of creates this illusion that you're dealing with files, but it's really, you're like dealing with files within files.
Yeah, Arne, do you see my screen right now?
Yeah.
This is this is a Lambda Island project that we've used in the past. Do you know where I would find examples of what you were just saying? Disclaimer, everybody, this is my I use VS Code. It's not my most commonly used editor, so we will struggle through together. If
well, you have a working REPL, right? So like, just
I do have a working REPL. Yeah, I do have a working REPL, and that's why
in your namespace, let's do like, for instance, an IO/file. Yeah, like let's require Clojure Java IO.
Okay.
Start there.
Oh yeah, some of my key bindings. It's like my key bindings are going to be iffy, is really what I will apologize for ahead of time.
You can do it. You can do it.
I'm glad you're doing this and not me. Mine would be like just littered with F word after F word. So
yeah. So what am I importing?
Clojure.java.io, SIO.
Yes, give it a nice short name.
Yeah. That's the most common alias.
Yeah, that's a pretty common alias. And so now we required it, and well, I'll put the namespace over in a second. I guess two different REPL flows too. I could send this over to the REPL now to make sure I get the dependency, or I could wait and send the whole file over at once, which is probably what I'll do.
Either way.
So we imported it as IO, and I'm going to start IO /
file. And then let's give it a path of anything in this project, really. Like, for instance, like, bb.eden in a string.
Yeah.
In a string?
Yeah, bb.eden. There it is, sitting there in the disk.
Yeah. All right, what does that return?
Okay, let's.
You might have to do the require first, right?
Yeah. I'm gonna read.
Evaluate the top form.
We're gonna learn together is because the key bindings are
Yes.
all over here. I'm pretty sure they're the same as so Alt Enter is top level. Control Enter. No. I want to send over the entire
Entire file.
file. Yeah. Alt Enter. Do y'all see?
Well, top.
I just
top
copy
by,
and paste.
top by top form by form should work too, right?
Form by
Like,
form. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll do.
Send that form over.
Yep. We
Voila.
send that form
Okay.
over. We saw. Let's make sure this.
So that sent it to the REPL and evaluated.
That sent to the REPL.
For
And
the
we
people
got.
who aren't aware. Yeah.
We saw something, and then I'm over here. I'm going to do again Control Enter, and see how it's sent over here. And we
Yeah.
got that. Yeah, that object, and it came back as an object as a Java IO file. And is that what are these? What's this?
yeah, that's
Cosmos.
because it's a Java object. It prints as in a bit of a funny way. If you evaluate this again, you're going to see that number is different.
Isn't it the object ID? Like each separate object has its own ID.
Yeah, it's
That's
the object ID, and it has to do with like the place in memory where the object lives, but it's not something that is really very important.
Noise. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. So this was a good
And you
demo.
could slurp that file in. You could slurp the result of that in and see what's in there.
Let's see. So
If you
instead
wanted
of
to-
file, I would call slurp, right?
Or you could just slurp the IO file, I think.
Yeah, you can slurp either way. You can slurp with the IO file.
If you
over
want to,
the
yeah,
side.
just put
I
slurp
hit
around it. Wrap. Just slurp. Just slurp is at the top.
Just
Slurp
slurp.
is like a core function.
Okay.
Yeah. And wrap
I
that
didn't
around
know
the
if
IO file.
IO had. Well, I probably wouldn't shadow.
Yeah.
It's gonna work. No.
No, put
My
it in.
slurp. Yeah, my key
Can't
slurp
bindings
your
of my
slurp.
slurping is not. No. Wait. No.
You might
I have
to just-
Emacs key bindings on my VS Code, but not.
You might have to do it like an animal and copy and paste it into.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay. Shift. Do I even have a
There's a
shift?
thing called cut and paste. You could do it.
Okay.
you can do this.
so
You can do it. We're gonna
Oh,
get
wait,
that
wait.
friend over there. Oh, it's gonna be
I'm doing it. I'm
glorious.
doing it, y'all. I'm doing it. So what we are struggling with right now, just so y'all know, is something called pair edit, and a lot of people, a lot of Emacs people, it's a good thing, can be a bad thing. So pair edit enforces your parentheses, and like right now, even if I go back, I'm hitting backspace. It's like nah.
It won't let you.
We're not gonna let you unbalance your parentheses, you monster. And so a hack is I'm going to like highlight it, go over it, and then space. Oh my God, that's not even working. Oh my goodness. I might have to turn off pair edit. Oh, I can't turn off pair edit. Okay. Like an animal, copy paste. Oh, here we go.
Just copy or cut that thing on the right. Paste it in.
Cut, what is that? Command X. Yes. And then go to the end here. And some of you, if you use Mac, some of those key bindings actually exist. If you've ever used Command A to go to the beginning of the line or Command E to go to the end of the line, those are Emacs key bindings, and those kind of like Emacs key bindings and pair edit, they're kind of all in the same, associated with the language, not really language, which you kind of got to know to be hip to these things. So we have digressed, but this is a nice little tour. So now we slurped.
Yeah, so evaluate that form. I'm just curious.
Yeah. I did Control Enter. I went to
Now
the
you
end of the
see
form
it.
and I hit Control Enter to evaluate it. We can see it here and over here in the REPL.
So it slurped in that resource and turned it into a string, or I'm sorry, that file.
Yeah, and we can see the Git SHA, which is very useful too. Oh, neat.
Okay, now let's do this in steps. If you change bb.eden to src/lambda island/uri.cljc.
Dot CLJS. Wait, the dot what was it?
Slash URI
That's CLJC.
.cljc.
CLJS. Okay, not in no Eden here.
No Eden, CLJC instead of CLJS, and a dot instead of the last slash.
Oh yeah. It's almost like
it.
so yeah, you lose IQ points when you're doing this. Everybody, FYI, that's expected.
And to me, this feels very vulgar, but you're going to get the right answer. Whereas IO resource is more refined. Yeah, this is vulgar because you're giving the whole path to it. Yeah.
Yeah. So now if we change IO file to IO resource.
Well, should we do it like just copy that
Yeah.
line and then paste it
Yeah,
below
actually,
so we
yeah,
can see
let's-
side by side?
Let's copy that line and also like do it without the slurp first.
Yeah, and you're doing great, Jordan. Thank you. I always I sweat so much whenever like I'm coding in front of people. And,
Oh, Alt X,
So-
are you gonna work? No. Okay. All right. All
Yeah,
right. 'Cause,
I'm-
I have
my
my keybind to
apologies.
uppercut that.
Apologies to Jordan for putting her on the spot. I didn't realize VS Code was not her day-to-day driver.
Well, it's my fault, and I will admit that and maybe we should ask the audience a little bit how they feel about that. Is that a lot of us screen share using Emacs, and a lot of people getting started are using VS Code. And so I said, hey, everybody, we should really adopt VS Code. And when we're doing screen sharing, we should use VS Code because that's going to be conceptually easy for someone to read and understand if they're using VS Code. And Arne had me put my money where my mouth is. And today, and said, hey, I can't screen share. Can you screen share using VS Code? Like you said? I'm like, yes. I believe in.
You're doing great. Nothing
I
to
am
worry
doing
about.
great.
Yeah, but like while Jordan is figuring this out, like let's actually hear from the audience. Like, does it like especially folks who have been here in the past and have maybe seen me or others, screen share with Emacs. Does it make a difference to you? Are you a VS Code user? Are you not a VS Code user? Does it help? Does it not matter? What please chime in, give us a little bit of input here.
Command C. V.
I use VS Code.
Okay.
Have you
Sunny
seen people
says
share-
doesn't matter. Got a couple Emacs
Um,
users in the audience.
Resource? Resources, resource.
Oh, and Wendy, that was the doesn't matter was in response to the general question, not to you saying that you use VS Code.
Doesn't matter. Yeah, I don't know. Then maybe I was totally off base, but when I read other people's code and different IDEs I'm not used to, it takes me a conceptual jump to like adjust. I'm like, oh, that's a different font than my brain is used to reading. And I didn't want anybody to experience that. Okay, Control Enter. We see that. And we go down here. View. What is this the same? Yes, it is. And Control Enter. So the first one, we got back that object, and the second one, we got back nil. Was this intended?
Yeah, so we got back nil. Why do we get back nil? Now try removing the src slash.
5.
Oh, is it gonna do it from the rel? Okay, I won't spoil it. Oh, hey, look
Boom.
at that.
Oh, hey.
Boom.
Now it's no longer vulgar, in my opinion. This is refined. This is the way you should do it.
'Cause this is the relative path, and this is the full path, eh? Did I say that? correctly?
Well, there's a couple things going on. Yeah, so it's no longer a Java IO file, it's a Java net URL. And in particular, it's a file, it has a file protocol. So it is still, in a way, it still points at a file, but it does it in a more general way. Like the thing that you get back could also be a URL that like points at something else that doesn't point to a specific file. Depending on how your class loaders, that word has come up a couple times now. Basically, how does this component inside the JVM that's responsible for handing your program the things that it asks for, it can sort of have different strategies to do that. So in this case, it looked it up inside src, inside the source directory. Why did it do that? Well, for that, maybe we can open deps Eden.
Yeah,
Be up here.
it's not on the left there somewhere.
Yeah,
There it is.
I had it open.
Okay, yeah.
Always the first thing open. I always, whenever I open a project, I always open the depths folder first. I just kind of take a little pixie weeksy.
Yeah, I also start there often too. So you see there paths src, right? Like that means that that's going to be one of the places where the JVM is going to look for things. And so very often, if like this project doesn't have resources, but very often in this paths, you'll also find a resources directory. Jordan, maybe you can add it there.
Sure.
So if this project had a resources folder, then we could put stuff in there, CSS files, HTML files, CSV files, anything that your program would want to access, drop it in there, and then you can use IO resource and a relative path to find those things.
And in ClojureScript too, a lot of times if you want to use your favicons, your React icons, like all of the things that you want to your icons that you want, emojis, things like that you want, that would also be in your resources folder.
Yeah, and
So-
that's actually Daniel, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like, I think the kind of general problem is like, how do you name a resource, or like how do you give an address for something that you want to read or write to, right? And so like there's like a few different mechanisms that we have for doing that. So like the Java class path is one way. It's like when we're building the paths here on line 1, this is one way of like expanding the Java class path. And like the Java class path is like this one specific way of being able to find files like from within your program. Is that am I accurate so far? Yeah. But yeah, so it's like these different tools that we have, like IO resource and the objects that get returned, java.io.file and java.net.url. These are all different. These, like, the general problem here is like identifying something somewhere using some kind of address. And sometimes the address can be relative to the process that's running, and sometimes like the address can be relative to the class path. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's all I've got.
Jordan, can you try one more thing in your REPL?
Sure.
Can you try
Just
IO
directly
resource?
in the REPL?
Yeah, or
Yeah.
in your REPL namespace.
That's good there. IO resource.
Yeah,
IO
it's-
resource of Clojure/core.clj.
That's what I was going to suggest. Thank you. Perfecto. That's the next perfect example.
You know, we'll go back to my Clouncil demo page just to have them all right next to each other. All right, so we have.
You ready for this?
IO resource.
Mike, you're pretty spicy today. I really like it.
I am. Well, I'm opinionated today, and this feels like
So
right?
/core.
/core. .clj. All right.
Yeah.
CLJ. All right.
Bring it on.
Ready,
what
set,
happens.
bam.
Yes.
Ooh.
Get a load of that.
Ooh,
Right.
wow. Oh, so yeah, wait. This
Now you
M2
see the
thing's
truth.
Real familiar.
Yeah.
So it's pulling out the Uber jar, and it's saying like that. This is the path. That's my .m2. Oh,
Yeah,
wow,
all the way down
look at it.
into your M2. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah,
my
so it's
gosh!
in-
Don't
in
tell
your local-
anybody.
Yeah.
Do you see the
haven't
power?
Updated to Clojure 111. Don't tell Alice.
Shame
that
on
was
you,
like
shame
the
on you.
core. That was the core.
How dare you?
Hey,
But no,
that
the
was
cool
that's
thing is, like,
the-
look
or
where
no,
it got
no,
it from, though. That's cool. Like, it went all the way round to like your M2, all the way down into the jar, and then a moniker deep down in there with exclamation points, and
Yeah, and so you can
Arial. Don't tell
slurp
Arial.
this
I have a bug.
and it'll know that, like, oh, this is a jar URL. So then, and the jar URL contains a file URL. So the file points at the jar. It's going to find the jar, which is a zip file, and then inside the zip file, it's going to find the Clojure core file, and then it's going to give you that back.
and
Ha-ha.
a small thing to maybe blow your mind, if you're writing a compiler, this is how the compiler can find your source. If you're like saying, hey,
Wow.
compile all the stuff, it'll just get it off the class path. It'll read that
Yeah.
as resources and
Yeah,
compile that. So,
yeah.
It's all metacircular in the end. Yeah.
That's the thing. Like, in the end, it's all the same, right? Like, whether it's these, like, quote unquote resources or like your source files,
code. Yeah.
like the mechanisms and the lookup, like strategy are exactly the same. Like, Clojure will convert, like if you say Clojure Java IO, it's going to turn the dots into slashes and put a .clj or .cljc at the end. And then it's going to use the exact same mechanism, say, okay, like JVM, please find me this thing. Okay, we're out of time, I think, or like we should start wrapping up this topic. Let's take it back to the crowd. Was this helpful, or did we confuse you more?
That's a good question.
I'm going to stop screen sharing.
Do you like a refund for the last 45 minutes?
My money back.
Can we see using reactions? That would be great. If you look down at if you're using the native, is it a native app? The app on. If you're using the app, there should be a little reactions thing. Can we see like thumbs up? That was good. Oh, cool! Look at that. Or like a thumbs. I don't know. Pick some other emoji if it's not super. If you're like a little less clear on what things are. You're smarter though for it. Oh, heart. See, perfect. Oh, wait, heart.
Yeah,
thumbs up.
got a bunch of thumbs up.
Paula.
What did she do?
Scream emoji.
Oh, that one's nice. Yeah.
Ooh.
Cool.
All right, that
Okay.
looks great. Then we'd like to talk about a little bit of a different topic. Paula, maybe you want to take this to the crowd. Talk a little bit about Clojurians and the beginners channel. You're muted.
You're on mute. Muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was answering questions in the chat, so I didn't want to be tapping over everybody. This has been in Slack recently. I initially asked within the Clouncil channel, and Arne was kind enough to ask a question on a broader scale. I have spoken with some people who go into the beginners channel on Clojurian Slack, and they look at the questions being asked there, that they have two strings, hello and world, and they want to figure out how to make a single string out of them. And so they go to beginners and they see questions about macros and all sorts of deep, complex things within Clojure, and think this is much more complex than the simple thing I want to ask. This isn't the right forum for me. And I've been concerned that it wasn't necessarily welcoming to somebody who had the very basic questions to go into beginners channel, and to be and to find somewhere that's necessarily going to be welcoming. It might be, but given the scope of some of the questions which are already there, I heard that some beginners find that this is intimidating. And so my questions were like, is the beginners channel the right place for them, or is the beginners channel the right place for more advanced users to be asking questions where they don't want to feel like they're asking something that other experienced Clojure developers might laugh at them for, and so they go to beginners because you're not going to be criticized in there. So that was the basis of it all. I don't necessarily know what the best outcome is, but like, that's putting it out there. Do you want to pick it up again, Arne?
Yeah, so who knows about the beginners channel? Raise your hand, or put up your emoji. And then keep it up if you've posted in there. Actually, maybe it was should have started with the negative to see if we can. Yeah, so it seems like most people. Okay. Does anyone is there anyone who can particularly relate to what Paul is talking about? And feel free, we're a fairly small group, feel free to unmute yourself and just jump in. Does anyone else have an opinion on this? As maybe someone who's coming from that perspective, how have you looked at the kind of stuff that's being posted there? How do you feel about posting stuff in there? Not everyone at once.
I can go. I feel like I posted in the chat, but I've asked a number of questions in the beginners channel, even though I've been programming in Clojure for like 4.5 years. And it can be hard to know the difficulty level of a given question. Even as an experienced user, like how beginner is this or how complicated is this? Like sometimes it's as simple as, are the doc string wrong? Am I getting the wrong result versus like, how do I write a macro? Which is what Paula referenced in relation to like being too advanced, right? Somebody says, I just want to do something very basic versus being intimidated by a macro question. And there's not like an advanced questions channel. There's like the Clojure channel, which is kind of like general chatter and people answer questions, but it's not quite as geared towards question answer the way that I think beginners displays itself. And so I find it challenging to know which channel to ask a given question if it's not about a specific library.
So when we brought this up, so there's also a community development channel, and that's why we started this conversation about, okay, like, do we need some guidelines around the beginners channel? And one of the things that people pointed out is that like, what from their perspective, the big difference between beginners and Clojure is not necessarily the questions that get asked, but the way that answers are given. Which I did think was, well, I think Paula's point is still absolutely valid. And I think, it might be helpful to have a little bit of encouragement to say like, okay, like if you already know a bit more, like leave some room for the real beginners and move it to Clojure. But yeah, like, I guess that might also be the reason that people sometimes go to beginner, even though they're not that beginner anymore, because they kind of they want people to go gentle on them, right? Like explain it to me like I'm 5 or okay, like, because it is true that like in the Clojure chat, people might be a bit more concise or like maybe to the point of being curt, where it's like, like this isn't always great, but people might assume that like, oh, like we're experts among experts. I should be able to explain this in, just a few words and you'll infer the rest. And so if people don't really want that, then they go to beginners. Does that resonate? Does that make sense?
So I have a question as far as like anybody who is in here and is like truly beginner, would that be intimidating? Would that discourage you from asking a question? If you went in there and saw that the question before yours that people were still kind of responding to was the intricacy of like how to create a macro. I'm again just using this advanced example. And you wanted to be like, how do I join a string? Well, would that discourage you because of the juxtaposition, I guess, of the two concepts? Or would you feel comfortable? Like, just the other side of it, because yeah, I understand. I would ask if I was going to ask a question, I'd ask in beginner channel too, because I still feel like be nice to me, be easy on me. I don't want to fight. Nobody wants to fight. And so yeah, I guess I would ask anybody who's like truly beginner, would that discourage you, or do you not really care, or does it really not matter as much?
I've been discouraged from asking anything in there. I check every once in a while. I'm like, do I understand anything they're saying? Nope. Okay, never mind. Like maybe another day. Maybe I'll see something that I understand, or see something that's not so beyond me at my time where I'm at and my learning. But I'm like, it's gonna hang back, figure this out myself.
So yeah. We I guess we were also throwing around the idea of making a different channel. I mean, although that would be another thing for Sean Corfield to mod, or one of us would have to mod it, but like a no silly questions channel, kind of that idea was thrown around. What do folks think about that? Would you feel more apt to ask a question and a note like, I don't know, I can also load another counselor.
Yeah. I think Wendy's point like does show that, like the problem is also that like beginners is a vague and relative term. Like you can be like 20 years of programming experience, but picked up Clojure last week. That would make you a Clojure beginner. But maybe in a week, you're at a point where you're asking questions that like true beginners would not be asking in their first couple of years. And I do absolutely see the point that it's like, if we want absolute beginners to engage in the community, then they have to feel that there is a space where they are among peers. And that it seems like the current beginner channel is not that. So I think this is something we can think about, and I'm not sure like what the solution is going to be, but I do feel like with there is an issue there that we can think about more.
Wait a minute, the Clouncil channel. Because we're super. Isn't that our whole thing, is being accessible and nice? And maybe we should promote our channel more as like a Wendy, ask your questions over yonder. We would love to field your questions.
Absolutely, and we've had a bit of that already, especially follow up after Clouncil sessions. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, if anyone here like resonates or like feels the same way, it's like this is a little bit too intimidating for me. Next time you're stumped on your coding journey, please come to the Clouncil channel. This also just gives us ideas for what we can talk on these sessions, and it hopefully we can evolve it into a little bit of a supportive community for everyone.
Oh yeah, folks, we're drying up on questions. You have a responsibility. I need y'all Michael Nardell isn't here, but he's given a lot of questions that are super useful and great. And I'd like to thank him for that. You might watch this YouTube later. But we're running out of, we're getting dangerously close to running out of question, folks. So if you can go to www.clouncil.com and give us your question, we want to hear from you. No question too silly.
Absolutely. theclouncil.com, find the form, enter the question. We'll be forever grateful, and you might get featured on this show. Okay, but speaking of questions, we did have a few more. We're sort of running towards the last few minutes of the podcast. Also, still want to leave a little bit of time for picks. Don't know if everyone actually has managed to have a think about their picks this week.
There's a cat up there.
Well, that would be a great pick. But then we would all have to come and get your cat. He might not like that.
She would love it.
Okay, Jordan, you had your one more code example in your REPL, right? Like this was a question that came in from, I believe, from Michael Nardell, who's been with us a couple times, although I'm not sure he made it today. But it could still be, like a short one we can point out.
Sure. Okay.
So yeah, that cubic function. Yeah, go ahead, Jordan.
So yeah, he had given us the cubic function. And you know what? I'll just admit that sometimes a lot of math, my eyes glaze over. I don't have a background in academic mathematics. So I had started to kind of make a more simple function, but I don't think we have the time for me to build that out completely. So the question that he asked was, is there any he found himself writing code. So this is creating a function called cubic. And when a function ends with a question mark here, it means that it will return a Boolean. That's just a code convention that you can kind of put in your noggin. It takes in, I think it's supposed to be integer string, takes one argument, int string. And his question was around, he found himself writing code where he would start with a let block and do a lot of transformations in the let block, and then, have the last line returning something. And he was asking, are there any performance implications? Is this a negative style? Is this okay? And short answer, yes, that's how we all write our code. But there's there is one thing as far as the REPL that's hard to. Hold on, Arne, talk for a second while I.
Yeah. So yeah, we really just wanted to briefly pick this up and say like, yes, Michael, you are doing it right. There's absolutely nothing wrong with having a lot of stuff. Oh yeah, the XYZ in that that doc string, the quotes around it need to be quoted. That's a little problem.
Oh,
And
is
that's
that
why you're
what's
getting a macro expansion error. Now the one
maybe-
line up where it says like representing a number
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
XYZ.
That's
Yeah,
what it
that's
is. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's
need
like
to be
opening and
escaped.
closing a string. So like it looks like it's right, but yeah.
And this is a doc string, everybody. If you're writing good code,
Is it parented like?
good code usually has doc strings. Here we go. Write a string
Okay,
number,
all
and
right,
this is
now
going to
it
be back
should.
tick mark X, Y, Z
Yes.
determines if this. So
now
a
you
good
can
doc string
eval
usually
this.
say takes this, does this to it. It tells you what it does. So, okay, that maybe. Now let me send this over to the REPL. Okay, I sent this over to the REPL. So now the REPL's like knows what cubic is, right? And let's give a little cubic question mark 9. Is that going to be a good?
Well, it takes a string.
Because I had a string representing number XYZ. I didn't actually read the doc string, you see?
So put quotes around your 9. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay. Let's, here we go. EOF reading string.
Yeah, I mean, given that doc string was like badly quoted, makes me think that he typed that out in the form without actually running it. So I'm not sure if we're going to be able to
Yeah.
get it to
Okay,
run.
well then maybe we can. So like this was going to be a simple foop. It takes one arg. And arg was going to be a list of integers. I was just trying to build the most simple thing. Let's just pretend that this let statement has like 3 or 4 more lines where we're taking the first arg, we're adding to it, we're doing other things. But I kind of want to show you the only issues with with lets here is that when we use our REPL to inspect, let's just return. What? Let's do, no, I guess we're going to have to add one more. First arg, we'll do res is plus 10 to first arg. Does this look and sound to y'all of just a way to demo this, or you demo this a different way?
That's cool.
And then down here, we'll return the res.
Okay.
But if as we're writing this function, we, wanted to see what the first arg is, and I'm also going to send this in. I'm going to send it as arg1 so we don't shadow things here. Okay, so if I was doing this and I wanted to do simple foop over arg1, 11. Cool. And this is really simple. So, but if we wanted to kind of inspect these middle lines, say I wanted to know what first arg was, my instinct would be to go to first arg, hit control enter, send it to my REPL and look at what it is. But if it's in a let block, you can't really do that. And so control G, how do I get out of that syntax error? Can you not?
It's an overlay. It'll go away, I think.
That's
when
an
you
overlay.
evaluate something else.
Okay. Let's go here. So what you end up having to do, you'll see I call it like the def and test. So that overlay is really killing my vibe. So a lot of times you'll see like def first arg, and Arne demoed this recently as one of the ways, kind of like just a simple way to inspect things and debug with your REPL. You could send this through, and then you could go to first arg. Ah, whoa, cat rain. It almost just rained a cat on me. She's okay. All right. Okay. Probably doing.
Yeah, you haven't invoked simple foop yet.
Oh, okay. That's what I need to do. Thank you. Thank you, Arne. Here we go. Okay. So if we do that, and then hopefully, oh, hi, baby girl. If we go here, so now I can see what first arg is, but I kind of had to do this ugly thing where I had to see what was in the let. I had to say def for, and it's kind of ugly. So that's kind of the only thing that is a bummer about lets. but you can get away with that. I think I don't know what episode it is. We'll link it in the bottom description of YouTube, where we went over you can use Portal, you can use a bajillion other things. I would say that's the only downside of Let. What about
so there's
y'all? What do you
certainly
think?
like there's no performance impact, or like this is very normal Clojure code. I think the only other thing I would add is that, like, so this code, you could write it with a let and like give things very explicit names, or you might be like, depending on what it is, you might be able to like not give those things names and use like, for instance, a threading macro and just sort of like have everything in a single form. And naming things is hard. So sometimes it's actually better to like not have to name every single thing. And so this is like in functional programming circles, they call this point freestyle, where it's just like, like you're not explicitly naming things, you're just sort of composing the functionality. At the same time, I'm like, I feel like personally, like there's a balance somewhere in the middle where like names are essential to understand what's going on. So, you want to name the things that help you understand and not name more than you have to. So that's a little bit of a balance. But yeah, main point for Michael and anyone else who's asking, this is absolutely normal to have a whole bunch of stuff like that in a let block. That's what we do every day.
Point freestyle sounds like something you do with a skateboard, with like, yeah, Mike knows what I'm talking about.
When you kick your skateboard high in the sky at the end, that's point free, man.
All right. Okay. Shall we wrap up and head over to picks?
Yeah.
I want to mention one thing too, though, actually, with like the last one final thing with what we were just doing there. The book Elements of Clojure has a good discussion of naming, and goes into like really good detail. I think Zach Tellman wrote it. He's a great author and has like, very considered meditation on good naming. And actually this issue in particular, like
a whole chapter on naming.
names.
Yeah.
All right, sorry.
Okay, cool.
Proceed.
Is that your pick?
That's your pick. That's a good pick.
Good
Oh, that
pick.
wasn't.
Oh no, that's not your pick. You have a better pick. It doesn't have to be your pick.
Yeah, Daniel, please let's have your picks.
We're doing picks. Okay. So I wanted to share this just because it's on my desk and it's a funny title. It's this book. I don't feel like it. It's actually this like kind of Buddhist, kind of like working through stuff like from a Zen perspective, but mostly it's the title is like really I mean, it's all about how we all have like an ego that really wants to keep doing its ego things, but anyway, but the title I think is funny, so I wanted to share it. That's my pick.
Thank you. Who should go next?
Oh, I got one, but somebody has to. I'm going to retrieve it while somebody else go before me.
Okay.
Well, Mike, why did you go ahead?
Okay. I've been getting into the TV series For All Mankind about the Apollo mission, and it's basically an alternative history of that stuff, and it's really well done. So if you get into like Apollo stuff, it's rooted in, it has the same characters from the true history, but then it introduces other plot twists and new characters and different things altogether. So I'm really getting into it just because it is really good and it's partially based in reality.
All right. Paula, what do you have for us?
Well, I've got a bit of advice, and I was also inspired by Mike just then. The advice is, if you have fair skin like I do, make sure you see a dermatologist regularly. Especially with summer happening, it's a good reminder. The thing that Mike reminded me of was I had been keeping up with For All Mankind, but recently I got into Counterpart, which stars J.K. Simmons. And I got into it because it stars J.K. Simmons, but he, again, it's an alternative history in like 1987, getting towards the end of the Cold War in Berlin. In East Berlin, a scientist accidentally splits the world in two. And so they start out identically, but then and there's a boundary where you can cross from one world to the other.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But then moving forward through history, like very slight differences lead to these butterfly effects. And so the worlds end up quite different over the years. Anyone who is alive in that year is still alive later on, but they're very different sort of characters, different people, and they're interacting with each other because they can cross this boundary. And one of the worlds is ours, and the other one is this alternate history that, and it's very interesting seeing the idea of a different Berlin. One of the things was that in the other world, there was a pandemic. And this was done like a year or two before COVID.
Oh,
so
wow.
it's interesting seeing this stuff that was made just before COVID and all these people walking around with masks on and things like that. And this was their presumption of what Berlin would be like if there was a pandemic and everybody had to wear masks and they had to clean their hands all the time. And it's like, wait, we actually ended up living that.
Yeah.
And it's a good throwback to the Cold War because that whole idea of the boundary that you weren't allowed to cross, and which was strictly controlled.
What's it called?
Counterpart.
Counterpart.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've just watched all of it. It's only 2 seasons. I think there was supposed to be a 3rd, but they cancelled it. It kind of wraps itself up reasonably well for the 2nd season. So I thoroughly enjoyed that show.
Thank you. That sounds good.
This is the Woozoo.
What is that?
I was in Costco perusing the fan section, as one does. And a Costco employee was like, "Yo, have you heard about the Woozoo? You got to get the Woozoo." And I was like, "What's the Woozoo?" And apparently everyone's going nuts over the Woozoo. So it's a fan that when you turn it on, it goes up and down and left and right. So it gets, see how it's going completely straight up and now it's going over here. It does all the different planes and it's really powerful. And I bought it to be a room fan, like white noise. No, too quiet for that. Can't even use it for that. It's too powerful, too amazing. Then I told my my stepmom about it. She's like, "You don't know about the Woozoo? Oh yeah, I'm in the Costco group. Everybody knows about the Woozoo. You gotta know the Woozoo." And yeah, everybody so then I was in Costco the next week because I love Costco, and I saw people in the fan aisles perusing. And guess what I did? Have you heard about the Woozoo? And I passed on the story of the Woozoo to them. And then somebody else came up like, "Oh yeah, you haven't heard about the Woozoo?" So my pick is the Woozoo. It's a really great fan. You can get it at Costco. It's like $30 and it's just super efficient.
Viral marketing.
Yeah, good. Like word of mouth. That's,
Yeah, word
really
of mouth, yeah.
word of mouth marketing. It's, yeah, Woozoo. Good fan. Good fan. Summer months.
Cool.
All right, thank you very much. I think that just leaves me.
Yeah.
So my pick, I recently started reading for my summer enjoyment, the Well-Grounded Java Developer. So this is a Manning book, and the 2nd edition is currently in early access. I'll admit this is not like a super beginner's book. So like if you're still fairly new to Clojure and the whole Java ecosystem, it might not be the first or even the 2nd book to pick up. But if you do like want to dig a little bit deeper and get a bit better sense of like this platform that Clojure and everything is built on, I'm only a couple chapters in, but I'm super enjoying it. I mean, I learned Java 15 years ago, something like that. Sorry, I should have said 20. Yeah, like they start out with talking about the big changes that have happened in the last so many Java versions, the module system, these things that like so someone of our team was asking questions this morning. It's like, oh, this library tells me I need to add these extra flags because to open up these modules, like what's that all about? Talks about JVM bytecode. Also some stuff like the concurrency libraries that come with Java, which is definitely relevant for a lot of Clojure developers. And they actually do also have a chapter on Clojure and on Kotlin. So I'm curious to get to those. I'm not sure what they'll be saying about us, but I'm keen to find out. So yeah, the well-grounded Java developer, if you really want to round out your understanding of the JVM platform that the whole ecosystem lives on, I do recommend it.
Cool.
All right, so then I think that wraps up the Clouncil. Thank you all so much for joining us today, for sending in your great questions. I hope this was helpful. As mentioned a few times, go to theclouncil.com, send us your questions. Go to #d-Clowncil on Clojurians. Join the conversation. If you have questions that can't wait 2 weeks, or like even if they can, feel free to put them in there too. And us or other folks can try to help out and just sort of get a conversation going. Also, feel free to just drop in there and say good morning. That's cool too. We're there to hang out with peers basically. So thank you all so much for joining, and we should see you in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye.
See you. Talk to you soon.